Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. Hopefully you can all hear me inside this room, and our Zoomers can hopefully hear me also. We have Emily working our Zoom, so thank you to Emily. But I just wanted to take a second and introduce myself. I'm Sarah McKenney, and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at Nova Southeastern University. I'm really excited to welcome you to today's NSU Alumni's Lunch and Learn. And joining me in this office is my Assistant Director, Emily Lopez Martin, to my left, and outside is my Associate Director, Renee Johnson. Today marks our very first in-person Lunch and Learn. So this is a great turnout. I'm really excited to see you all in recognition of this special event. We launched this Lunch and Learn program back in March, and since then we've hosted monthly virtual conversations with our distinguished faculty across a variety of fields. We've talked about nutrition, we've talked about Alzheimer's research, we've talked about cybersecurity, and more. It's been really inspiring to see how these sessions continue to connect our community and engage them as well. And we're looking forward to continuing this series in the months ahead. And since this is truly a lunch and learn, lunch is served, so thank you for already enjoying this. And also please help yourselves whenever you're ready for another plate. We'll keep things moving and we're gonna end promptly at 1 p.m. We also do ask that you hold your questions until the end. There will be a Q&A opportunity. Today's presentation is especially timely as we honor and recognize our veterans tomorrow. We're proud to feature Dr. Dana Scott Mills, who will be discussing alternative therapies in veteran care, an important and insightful topic that explores innovative approaches to supporting those who have served our country. To introduce Dr. Mills, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Carmen Session, Associate Dean and Chair/Assistant Professor in the Department of Human Services at the Abraham S. Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carmen Session.
Thank you. That was a mouthful. Again, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for joining us today for this great presentation. We'll hear about how simulation-based experiences are explored as powerful psychoeducational interventions for veterans. But before we get started, it will be very important for us to thank our community partners, to thank Matthew Chinworth, because this research was funded initially by the Veterans Resource Center here at Nova Southeastern University. So thank you, Matthew. He's here today. Also, it was in support of by the Veterans Trust with Fred Roger, which is a former Marine, and Chairman Lee Hediger from the Veterans Trust. So thank you to them also for supporting this research. In the future, building on the promising research that you guys will hear so much about today, we also will expand on that. And the co-investigators, along with Dr. Dana Scott Mills, Dr. Alex Edmonds, and Dr. Thomas Kennedy, will expand to work to include first responders in this future projects and future interventions such as scuba diving. So without further ado, I would also like to introduce our distinguished speakers, which is Dr. Dana Scott Mills and Ms. Sulaim Saida. So Dr. Scott Mills, Dana Scott Mills, one second, give me 1 second, is the Associate Dean of Research and Program Planning and a program professor at Nova Southeastern University at the Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice. He is a community psychologist by training and works closely with colleagues from psychology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and healthcare sciences on projects that bridge research, practice, and community impact. His current studies explore innovative approaches to wellness and rehabilitation, including scuba therapy for veterans and mobile psychoeducational health services for individuals experiencing homelessness. He's passionate about mentorship, he enjoys helping students, and he turns his ideas into meaningful data-driven projects that improve lives. Joining him is Sulaim Saida. She's a senior public health major and Razor's Edge research scholar at Nova Southeastern University. Sulaim has conducted research on innovative alternative therapies for veterans with PTSD, including a race car simulation-based psychoeducational intervention. Her experience spans clinical research at Cleveland Clinic, Abdul-Dabai, and public health advocacy through roles with Girl Up Florida and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She brings a multidisciplinary lens to addressing mental health and health equity challenges. This Lunch and Learn session will showcase groundbreaking research and the intersection between research, community partnerships, and innovative approaches designed to support veterans living with PTSD. So together, Dr. Mills and Ms. Saida will share how evidence-based practices and research is being transformed into innovative practices that support our veterans and potentially first responders in a journey toward healing and integration. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dana Scott Mills and Ms. Sulaim Saida.
Thank you, Carmen. Welcome, good to see such a great turnout today. I'm super proud to be here. Thank you to the NSU Alumni Association for not only inviting me to be here, but also in making me feel a little bit like a campus star, like seeing my face on Instagram and posters around campus and things like that, and even some of the little monitors. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about this important work. Certainly want to welcome all of the NSU alums that are here. Also want to recognize a couple of other folks that are here. I have a table of future alums. One of my, part of my day job is I'm the director of the Razors Research Program, and I have some of my undergraduate students here supporting, most likely more Sulem than their professor, but I want to recognize them as well. This is the future of this country, folks. If you want to talk to somebody interesting, go talk to them because you'll be really, really impressed. I always say I never wanted to teach undergraduates. Now that I teach them, I can't imagine not doing it. Really, just a special group. So thank you all for being here. And then to some of my colleagues, Dr. Packer, appreciate the support as well, who's also an alum. So with all that, we're gonna jump right in and get started. So before I start talking about the project, I just want to tell just a really quick story of how I got involved with this. So my dean, Dr. Kimberly Durham, called me up on the phone and said, "Hey, you're interested in research and psychology. I have this group, the Veterans Trust in Fort Lauderdale, that uses a race car simulator and thinks that there are some therapeutic benefits from it. You want to get involved with that project?" And I was like, "What is she talking about?" I'm like, is this like a Mad Libs or something? Is this some kind of like a weird, trick that she's playing on me? Like, what's going on?" So I really had no idea. I was like, "What? I don't really understand what she's talking about." So of course that made me more intrigued. I was like, "Sure, why not?" But I really didn't know what I was getting into. And probably if I just, said that all, to you all, race car simulation therapy, you'd probably look at me in the same way that I was looking at my phone when she was telling me about this. So one of my goals is to show you that this is a real deal program, and it's all kind of couched within the context of understanding that there are ways to treat individuals with mental health disorders that aren't necessarily just typical talk therapy. And so that's kind of the overarching umbrella of what we're going to talk about. In a bit, I will introduce Sulem, who's going to talk a little bit more about the concept of alternative therapies. And so I'll save some of that for her for sure. Again, I do want to recognize this collaboration in this project, though. As Carmen had mentioned in the introduction, this is truly a collaboration here at the university. So I'm, as she mentioned, in the College of Education, as is one of my colleagues, Dr. Alex Edmonds, who's also a member of our team. Dr. Tom Kennedy is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs in the College of Psychology. So he is an integral part of this team as well, as is Matt Chenworth, who's sitting back there, and appreciate Matt being here, and some of his team from Veterans, the Military Affairs as well. So that's our kind of our top level team. We also have a variety of students that are actually involved. The two lead students are Leah Lancelota. So she is a PsyD student. She's actually using the projects that we're doing as part of her internship. So she has been an integral member of this team, actually presented our work at the American Psychological Association conference earlier this year. And then Sulem, who we've mentioned, sitting up here in the front, is also a student. You're going to hear from her as well. And then the folks from the Veterans Trust, two of which Carmen mentioned, with Lee Hediger and Fred Roger. But I do also want to recognize Steve Kentakarzi, Scott Beck, and Court Schmidt from Full Send Sim. So that's the entire team. So it's really these folks on the bottom line here. This was their idea. It was actually Steve's idea. This whole concept of using a race car simulator as therapy. So let's let's dive into, the content here. But, before we start talking specifically about, what it is that we're trying to do and why this is such an important topic, one thing that we do have to face is that we have a very significant and increasing public health crisis as it relates to mental illness. And so and you'll see that, there's always a lapse in the way that this data is calculated and tabulated, but according to the National Institute of Mental Health, if you look at their most recent data, in 2022, we're talking about over 59 million US adults, so nearly a quarter of the entire population of the US that qualifies for having a mental illness. About 15 million of those would be able to be diagnosed as a serious mental illness. From that, about 19% of the entire US population suffers from some type of anxiety disorder. About 8%, a little over 8%, has had at least one major depressive episode in a year. And then less than half of those individuals with a serious mental health disorder or any mental health illness have sought treatment. Okay, so you have 59 million people who have mental health disorders, and then you have less than half that are receiving treatment for those disorders for a whole variety of reasons, right? I think the next slide. One thing, I don't think it's any big secret, when we think of veterans and some of the issues that they experience, mental health issues tend to be one of the things that we think about the most. And, certainly that is the case. So in 2022 alone, we had over 6,400 suicides committed by veterans. The prevalence of PTSD is higher in veteran communities than it is in the general population. It's about a third higher. In one study, the prevalence of a major depressive order in veterans was about 31%. Remember, we said in the US it's about 9%. So we're talking, it's at least 3 times higher. And about 14% of US veterans reported a substance use disorder in the past year. Okay, so this is a population that when they come back, for a whole variety of reasons, does seem to suffer from fairly significant mental health issues that are simply not being addressed. And so you may be saying, well, why are they not being addressed? Well, there are a lot of legitimate reasons for that. One, simply is the social stigma associated with mental health treatment, right? So you're typically talking about a group of men. Men in general are not good about seeking treatment. In fact, if I were to look at that data and rather than just looking at the US population as a whole, kind of separate out men from women. Men generally they're not seeking treatment anywhere near at the same rate as women. And so that drives a lot of this, is just men just don't go to therapy anyway. The type of man who typically gets into the military, you typically get that kind of adrenaline seeker, that kind of that more typical alpha male type, which are the lowest. If you want to talk about, folks that are not going to go to therapy, that's kind of the lowest on the totem pole. So these are folks that will recognize that they have issues, but they don't envision themselves, quote unquote, sitting on a couch. In fact, there is some talk therapy fatigue for those individuals, and they're, really raised in environments that are much more action oriented. And so to think that they're going to sit on a couch and, talk to a perfect stranger who typically has no background in military experience. About 3/4 of mental health counselors in this country tend to be women. And so these guys are not going to show that vulnerability to a woman they don't know. So there's just so many factors that are set up. Never mind the fact that wait lists for psychological services are incredibly long now, whether that's through the VA or in private, in private practice. If you talk to our folks in the psychology clinic here, they'll tell you there's an incredibly long wait. And if you try to get services outside in private care, it could be 6 months before you are granted an appointment. So just there's a lack of services overall anyway. One of the inspirations for this this idea for me, and again, I'm going to talk obviously a lot more about this race car simulator project, but just the whole concept of alternative therapies. Once I started to read a little bit more about it, what was quite interesting. I read this book. I highly encourage you, if this is something you're interested in reading it. I'll say right off the bat, this is not a research text by any means. In fact, reading this reaffirmed to me that we do need some research to actually validate some of the things that were discovered in this book. What this book does is present a really interesting overview of some alternative creative approaches to providing therapeutic types of services to veterans. Now, some of these you've likely heard of, right? So, we think of like equine therapy, so using horses with therapy, art therapy, mindfulness training, and yoga, right? So these are some of the types of therapeutic modalities that tend to be the ones that we would think of that are most strongly associated with these alternative therapies that seem to be becoming a little bit more mainstream. Again, the problem here is that just doesn't fit the schema of these veterans. In fact, Steve, the guy from Veterans of Trust who came up with this idea, he went through all of those. He was looking for an outlet for himself, knew that traditional therapy wouldn't be it, and went through equine therapy and art therapy and did all these things and said, it's just not for me. Like it's just not doing what I want to do. And so that's where this race car simulator therapy was born. So the internal jargon that we use to describe this project is the Race Camp Project. And so I'll give you kind of the technical way that we would describe this. So if I were at a psychology conference or trying to pitch this idea to some funders, this is the way I would talk about it. So what we're trying to do is improve self-regulatory mechanisms using a race car simulated environment with the goal of changing self-regulation mechanisms so that behavior generalizes to real life stressors. So you're probably saying, what the heck does any of that really mean? Well, let me break it down for you. All throughout our day, we're always dealing with stress. And our goal in life is to not eliminate stress. Our goal is to figure out functional ways to be able to deal with it, right? I talk to my kids about this. I'm like, you're never gonna have a life that's stress-free. What you have to think about are what are the best ways to deal with stress? Now, all of us deal with stress differently. So some of us that are able to manage stress a little bit better, it tends to take a lot for us to kind of reach that level where we get that feeling, right? That our mind kind of racing and that feeling in our stomach that, where we have that somatic response to stress. Sometimes it can take a little bit more to achieve that. For some people, standing up here in this room would cause a tremendous amount of stress. The thought of doing it would cause stress. For others, it would have to be something that's maybe a little bit more extreme, but all of us experience that, right? We all do. And so when we talk about the self-regulatory mechanisms, the reason that I'm not in a full-blown panic attack when I'm standing here talking to you today is that I've developed the skills from a psychosomatic standpoint to be able to regulate that stress. So my body just does it automatically. I don't think, man, I need to relax and really think about calming my brain and getting my, all of that internal strife to go away. It just happens. And it happens because you either put yourselves in situations that are, kind of lower stress reducing, and you learn how to deal with it, or you can practice in other environments and actually your body will start to adapt to that stress. One way that you actually do this is through exercise. For my students, those that are interested in exercise science, they'll learn this, that one thing that exercise does actually does raise your cortisol level. And then your body will naturally learn how to bring that cortisol level back down. Cortisol is associated with stress. It's the body's hormonal release of cortisol that actually causes that stress response. And through exercise, your body learns how to regulate it better so that when you're in a stressful situation, you can get those cortisol levels to go down and you don't have all those negative elements of stress. And so there's that psychosomatic piece that takes place that we can't really control. And then there's the psychological piece that we can, right? So if somebody cuts us off in traffic, we're not going to go, jump out of the car and start screaming like a maniac, unless we are in this like high stress kind of, fight or flight type of modality. And again, typically when we have that response, it's that we haven't practiced, we haven't been in situations where we've been able to regulate that stress, to the extent that it helps us from having a more, a more appropriate response. So what we're doing in this project is actually introducing stress at a low level, and then we teach these individuals how to regulate that stress. And the way that we do it is through, again, the kind of the technical stuff. It's called stress inoculation therapy. So we put you in a stressful environment that's kind of low level, and we start to increase the stress level, and we see how your body responds. And then the other piece is what we refer to as cognitive processing theory. So when you have those stressful thoughts in your head, how can we kind of retrain those thoughts so that you start to think, in a way that stress levels go down? And then we also use biofeedback training as well. So the race camp project, what does it look like? So Essentially what happens is a veteran will come to campus. We have a full-blown race car simulator on campus. And in this photograph right here, you actually see kind of what it looks like. And so this is not a toy. This is not a video game. This actually is the same race car simulator that F1 drivers and professional NASCAR racers, what they use to train when they're not racing on a track. So this is a very sophisticated piece of equipment. While this is just a regular computer screen, a lot of the peripheral, the hardware that drives this thing is very, very different. And so the steering wheel feels like a real steering wheel. And so when you're turning, going really fast and you turn, you can feel the feedback in that steering wheel. If you start to veer off a road, you hit grass, like the wheel will spin out of control. I mean, so much so that if you try to hold on to that steering wheel, I mean, it feels like it's going to break your arm. I mean, this thing really turns very, very hard. It feels, very realistic. You'll see there's a bunch of buttons and switches in here, just like there are in a NASCAR or an F1 car. So this is the piece of equipment that we actually have here on campus that we use for this process. And so our veterans come in, and the first thing that we do is actually give them a lesson from a professional race car instructor on how to drive the simulator. Right, so all the basics and how do you actually maneuver this car? Because if I stuck any one of you in it, and Matt and some of the others in the room that have tried will tell you it's not easy. If I put any of you in there, no matter how great a driver you think you are, you're definitely going to crash within about 30 seconds. You're going to get super frustrated. You're going to be like, this thing is terrible. Trust me, because this is what I did. And I'm like, I'm done with this. Like, this thing is horrible. I actually went through the professional race car training myself, and it made an incredible difference. So one of the companies, Full Send Sims, that I mentioned, that was one of our partners, they provide the race car instruction for the veteran. So that's just the intro to this program to get to allow these guys to get up to speed and how to actually operate this piece of machinery. Once they become proficient there, we then actually get them in the seat, and now is where we start the quote unquote therapy. So we sit them down. We actually will hook them up to biofeedback equipment. So you'll see, in this case, this is Steve, again, the guy who created this program. You'll see that he has different electrodes on him. He actually has a chest strap on. So what we do is we measure we actually are taking an EKG. So we're measuring heart rate variability. We're measuring respiration rate. We're actually measuring skin conductance. So how much are you sweating? We're measuring their grip strength. So how hard are you holding onto the steering wheel? Okay, so these are all those somatic reactions that you get due to stress, right? If we're stressed, we start to sweat. If we're stressed, our heart rate increases, right? Our heart rate variability tends to become actually a little bit higher. If you're in a situation like this, you're going to be holding on tight. Right? So those are all, I can ask you, do you feel stressed? And you may tell me no, but I can see it here. So we actually will collect that data so that we actually know what the stress level is of those individuals. And what we do is we put them in an environment and we have them drive the car. And again, the idea is that we give them prompts to increase their stress level. So once they start to feel more comfortable driving the car, we say, okay, your next lap, let's do it 20 seconds faster, okay? And so they'll do their lap and maybe they crash or something, something happens during that lap. What we're doing, we're collecting all this data, all of this EKG data and heart rate data and respiration data as they're racing. And so what we do is we actually overlay. We have a map of what the track looks like, and we can chart what all of those metrics are along the track, and we can actually go back and see what happened at different instances. And so what will end up happening is before you crash, your heart rate tends to go up, your grip strength always goes up, the skin conductance always goes up, right? You start to sweat a little bit more, and then you crash. So we share this information. There's actually another small screen that's part of this race car simulator that shows that biometric data, and we'll tell the driver, hey, look, this is where you crashed last time, and as you did, your heart rate was going up, your respiration rates, you were breathing faster. Like we knew you were going to crash because all of that biological data was telling us that stress was going up. So next time you're getting ready to go into that turn, before you get there, think about this, watch this, watch your heart rate, watch your respiration rate, start breathing. And we teach them diaphragmatic breathing and box breathing and all those different techniques. And we're like, practice that. And then when you're getting into that turn, before you get there, you know it's coming. Start to work on that breathing, and let's see if you can get through it. Lo and behold, they get through it, right? So wow, it works. So then we start to tell them, hey, next time before you come to the session, practice those things just before you show up. So before you actually come, we want you to work on that breathing for 10 minutes. And we want you to, we want you to work on trying to regulate your heart rate. We give them, we actually have other like Fitbit types of devices they can wear too, so they can start to get a little bit more feedback on how they're doing and regulating some of those biometric behaviors. Once we have established that we have done an adequate job in training them to be able to regulate their stress better as they see it, now's where we actually move to what we refer to as the psychological skills training. So now we do sit them down and we start to tell them, hey, look, this stuff is transferable. We're changing your body now. Now when you're in stressful situations, some of these things are going to start to occur naturally. You're going to start to see that your respiration rate is going to be a little bit lower. That if you're in a stressful situation, if you start to practice this type of breathing, what you're going to find is that your heart rate starts to go down. You start to actually feel a little bit better. So now we kind of let them in on what it is that we're trying to do. We say, hey, this is what we're doing. We kind of Jedi mind tricked you now into therapy. Like, you're in therapy, whether you thought so or not. Like, we actually, and then they're like, oh, interesting, right? And so then they'll start to tell us, you know what? It's funny you say that, because the other day I was driving my kids to school, and typically when they start getting a little bit rowdy, or I'm late, I get really stressed and I'll start screaming at them. And I found I just didn't do it. And I actually thought it was kind of strange. Like, they'll actually start to tell us those kinds of things. That somatic response to stress can be controlled. Again, we can't control it once we're there in that stressful situation. But again, once we train our bodies how to deal with it, actually, it does tend to work. And so what we have done is changed some of those physiological reactions to stress. And now we can start to combine that with some of the cognitive stuff. Again, we do so at first using the race car. We say, hey, what we want you to do, we're going to start pushing you harder. Now, when you're on that racetrack, you're going to be out there with other drivers, and the drivers are trying to run you off the track. And we want you to start to think about, rather than getting frustrated, before you get into that race, we want you to use visualization and imagery to actually envision you doing well in that race. These are skills that we use in sports psychology. So one of my colleagues, Dr. Edmonds, the reason that I asked him to be on the project was that's his area. He's a sports psychologist. He went to school, got his PhD at Florida State, and actually did something very similar, where he used a race car simulator with golfers and tennis players at Florida State to teach them these concepts of self-regulation in the context of performance. And so he did a very similar project, again, very different type of an audience. These are really high performers, tend to be able to perform under really high stress. So the level of stress that you have to induce in them is much, much higher. But he had some really interesting results. And so a lot of what we're doing there is rooted in the sports psychology literature as well. And so, borrowing from other disciplines where we know what do athletes have in common with veterans, kind of a lot, right? That thrill seeker, that strive to perfection, that like, I want to do things, I want to compete and do things and accomplish a set of goals and tasks, right? I mean, Matt will tell you that those are common traits of these men, that this is how they function. And so when you get them in a similar type of environment, there's a lot of parallels. It was the first thing that Dr. Edmonds said when he met with these guys. He's like, I feel like I'm back in my days of working with athletes. It's exactly the same mindset, exactly the way they come into this. They get frustrated because they want to win, they want to do well. And so we have to start to regulate that in the same way that we do with an athlete. I know this is hard to see, but just to show you that there is some structure here, it's a 16 session protocol. And we get back to that. That's the biggest downside of this, is it does take a long time. But they go through 16 sessions total in this. And the sessions are broken down into the pre-assessment phase. So that's like that learning to drive phase. The learning phase and the prep phase, that's that they become proficient in being able to drive the car. Then there's learning, which is now we hook them up and we start to teach them how to drive, through that track a little bit better. Modification phase is that's when we start to give them the biofeedback information to get them to modify their habits more. Then we go to the second round of modification. Application is when we start working on the psychological piece. And then the post-assessment is when we ultimately release them, we debrief, and we go over that entire process. So the interesting thing that you want to know is it working? So I'm giving you results from our pilot study. We have 5 individuals that have gone through our pilot study so far, all 16 sessions. And this is what we have found. So I know this is kind of hard to see, but this black line here with the gray dots, this is what we measured is called the state trait anxiety scale. So those are the things that we measured. And then we also, of course, measured those somatic feelings of stress. So this dark black line actually indicates the somatic responses to stress. So that's the heart rate variability, the respiration rate. And as you can see, in this case, down is good, right? So what we're doing is as they move through these phases, the stress is actually increasing. We're actually increasing the stress in that environment. And what we're finding is that the response to stress has decreased, okay? The way that we know that the stress is increased is we ask them, so this cognitive piece are questions that we ask them about that environment. How stressful was that environment? Okay, so what we want to see is separation of those lines. We want this line, as that line goes up, we want this one to go down, because what that means is they're recognizing that the environment is more stressful, but the response that their body is having is not, it's not the same level of stress response. So this was a low stress environment in the learning phase. And you see that they were having, again, this is how they said it doesn't seem like a stressful environment, yet their body was acting by emitting a high stress reaction. So high heart rate, high skin conductance, high respiration rate. Over time, as stress increases, the somatic response goes down. Okay, so we were really thrilled when we saw this. We're like, okay, it looks like it's working. We're actually getting the results that we want to see. Another piece of information here that's kind of interesting is in combination with that, we give them the PCL5, which is a post-traumatic stress disorder inventory. And so there are different phases where we ask them questions related to their PTSD and whether they would qualify for a PTSD diagnosis. And they're all borderline. A score of 30 is PTSD, it would qualify you as having a PTSD diagnosis. Their average was 34. And then what we see is the modification phase. Again, that's when we start to give them the feedback of, hey, here's how you react physiologically to response. When we start to measure their PTSD symptoms, they start to tick down. And then this was, again, this is an average after 13 sessions of what their PTSD response was. So it's working. It's working. So even though as crazy as this idea was, as abstract as it seemed to be, once we established and connected it with theories of things that we actually understand, what we're finding is, and this isn't my opinion, we have data now to support this, is it works. It works. And now just a couple of I guess other indicators that show that others are now starting to believe that it works. The College of Psychology has now recognized this as a bona fide therapeutic center where we have interns come in and work with these individuals. So that's a huge positive for us. So that means that we can actually increase the human resources that we have to work with these individuals. And the fact that the American Psychological Association accepted this as a presentation and they're interested, we actually submitted our first publication based on this pilot data just a couple of weeks ago. We feel really confident that we're onto something here. So I'm going to turn it over to Sulem now to talk a little bit about the concept of alternative therapies. Then I'm going to come back and talk about what we're going to do, what we're doing next, and kind of in the immediate, and then what we're going to do after that.
Hi everyone, my name is Sulem Sarida and I'm an undergraduate research assistant on the Race Camp project. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about, a little bit about why alternative therapies are valuable. So there's a broad range of alternative therapies for PTSD care, and these range from what we're doing at the Race Camp project with virtual reality using the race car simulator and biofeedback technology to things like meditation, mindfulness, yoga, scuba, animal therapy. There's just a bunch of therapies. And because there is so much variety, it makes it a lot easier for individuals who do have PTSD to find a form of therapy that resonates with them and feels sustainable for them. And this makes PTSD care more accessible and attainable for broader populations. And this is especially true for populations in which things like stigma and stigma around mental health support and just mental health challenges in general are an issue. And this is something that we do see within the veteran population. there is a growing body of research that indicates that these alternative treatment methods, like biofeedback and virtual reality, like we're using in the Race Camps project, show similar or even greater reductions in PTSD symptoms. And we see even better results whenever we find ways to combine traditional therapies with newer alternative and novel therapies, which is exactly what we're doing with this project. Many of these approaches have also shown to be as effective as medication for some patients, and they don't have to deal with the negative side effects or the stigma associated with medication. And as well as these alternative therapies tend to have lower attrition rates or lower dropout rates because they're usually more hands-on and less clinical in nature, which makes them more engaging. So now what stands out about the race car simulator specifically? So the racing simulator is meant to translate military training into a treatment modality. So Dr. Mills had mentioned oh, sorry, can you guys not hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. So Dr. Mills had mentioned that Steve Cantarze, who is the veteran who came up with the project initially, I actually had a chance to speak to him the other week, and he explained to me that in the military, you're trained to be you're trained to be like a light switch. You're trained to go from 0 to 100 within a split second. But whenever you have to reintegrate into civilian life, you have to essentially untrain yourself and you have to learn how to self-regulate. And in the military, they use virtual reality a lot for a bunch of training purposes, including things like teaching veterans how to use certain technology, equipment, and for combat-related scenarios. And so he thought, why not use something that a lot of veterans are already familiar with to teach them how to reintegrate into civilian life and learn how to, and as a form of therapy. So, and he also mentioned that he didn't really enjoy traditional talk-based therapies. He didn't think they were effective because he felt like clinicians couldn't really couldn't really connect with his experiences or really grasp the depth of his experiences and why they impacted him in the way that they did. And even in group therapy sessions with other veterans, he found that he couldn't really connect with their experiences as well, due to the fact that they were deployed in different regions or they played different roles within the military, which led to them having very different experiences. And so the point of the race car simulator is to equip veterans with the tools to self-regulate without having to deal with the discomfort of verbal disclosures or group discussion sessions, which a lot of veterans just aren't comfortable doing, especially like right after, coming from combat. And we have had feedback from some participants that indicates that they felt like the race camp experience was the first time that they experienced mental health treatment post military that felt both accessible and sustainable for them.
Thank you, Salim. Salim's gonna be a physician in about 4 years, so just if you go to the ER and you measure, let her know that you saw her talk today. So as Salim said, that's the idea, right? Is how can we make therapy more accessible and have folks want to actually attend? And so this, if nothing else, has achieved that goal in addition to some of the other goals that we've seen. As I start to wrap up, though, I do want to talk just a little bit about some of the other ideas that we have. One thing that we know is that the race car process, that race car protocol, isn't going to be attractive to everybody, and so we need to start thinking about other alternative therapies that may be attractive to some that either are not interested in a race car simulator or that don't have the physical capacity to operate a car, right? If you are, one thing that's not unusual for veterans is you may be, have suffered an injury, could be paraplegic, quadriplegic, missing a limb, something like that. You wouldn't be able to actually operate the race car simulator without pretty significant accommodations. So what we've actually done, we have a small grant right now from the university, the president's faculty grants, where we're going to be exploring freediving as a therapeutic modality. So a couple of things about freediving. So freediving is not, it's not wearing an oxygen tank, it's actually diving without one. And so you can get freediving certification. We have a freediving instructor here at the university that we're going to use to help us with this process. And you ultimately, to earn that certification, have to be able to dive 60 feet underwater, holding your breath without an oxygen tank. So that's the goal. Most people, when they, you know, if I were to throw, if you're not a diver, and I threw you in the pool and said, hold your breath as long as you can, after about 30 seconds, we'll start to say that's about it. These free divers can go up to 6 minutes holding their breath underwater. And so they start to learn how to regulate a lot of those same mechanisms that we're dealing with in trying to reduce stress. It's built into teaching free diving. The way that this came about was the diving folks here at the university. Actually, there was a couple of my students that are not here today, but they connected me with the dive folks because they said, hey, we're in the marine sciences program. One of our dive instructors has heard about the race car simulator as an alternative therapy and thinks diving may be another modality for you. Would you like to talk to him? And of course, I said, let's do it. And then here we are, a year and a half later, we're making this come to fruition. So that's why I love these guys so much, because they give me good ideas that I can get credit for, but it was their idea. So what do we do in free diving? We work on controlled breathing. It is the integral part. That is how it works. Like, you have to be able to do it. When we started listening to the free diving person describe the physiology of what happens, I couldn't tell if they were describing stress reduction or free diving. It's the same thing. You got to slow that breath down. You have to learn to breathe from the diaphragm. When you're holding your breath, I don't even fully understand all of these mechanisms or how it works, but when you're underwater, there are ways that you can adjust your diaphragm to help the carbon dioxide build up in your body not be as significant, so you don't get dizzy and feel like you're going to pass out. So it works. And then, of course, there's this other piece that it's incredibly rewarding, builds trust, builds a tremendous amount of confidence once you can actually do it. The biggest advantage to free diving is the training takes 1 week. So we can do now what's taking us 16 sessions, we can do it in 5 days. So we are in the process now of putting this together, where the goal is to start to launch it in a small pilot project in the winter. So we're just about ready to do that. And so we do have our same collaborations with Veterans Trust. We're looking for more collaborators within the VA and other not-for-profit centers. And then the idea that we've come up with is that every veteran deserves a space to heal that honors their courage and restores their calm. That's not in that traditional therapeutic modality. The final thing that I want to touch on are just some other future directions that we have. If you were to ask me what's pie in the sky, what do you want to do? I would say that we would want to develop a full-service veterans healthcare center that integrates in all the great health services that we have that hopefully you know about. So Matt and his team do a really good job, connecting the veterans here with university resources where they can come get resources in medicine, dentistry, vision, and hearing completely for free, including glasses and hearing aids. So they come in, they work with Matt. We actually just got some additional funding from the state to continue to support that program. We want to be a part of that as well, where we start to build in the mental health services and even do some career services as well. We have actually spoken to some folks in our medical school about doing a ketamine therapy trial where we use ketamine therapy, which is starting to gain a little bit of traction. Seems as though it might work well here, and we're looking at potentially doing a microdosing where you use kind of lower dose ketamine in combination with therapy to work as well. So really the idea is that we want to challenge ourselves to not just say, well, services are bad, there's just no way that we can get these folks in. It is what it is, and to accept that challenge and say, no, we need to start to develop new and innovative ways to engage this population so that we can get them to want to go and get the treatment that they deserve, frankly, so that they can become functional members, in society after they've given all that they have to us during their military service. And that's essentially what we're doing. So that's really it. I certainly would like to welcome any questions you have. And again, thank you. I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Help facilitate the mic, because we're going to use the mic for our Zoomers. So do you want to go first? Yeah, great.
Dr. Mills, what about carryover, and are you doing any longitudinal work on this or other therapies?
Yeah, so certainly for the pilot project we are. So like I said, the folks that have gone through that have all gone through it. The first one that finished, it's been almost a year, and we still are in contact with them. So we're going to continue to collect data to see, what the carryover effects are. But obviously, that's the most important thing is, did it work? Like, does it appear as though it's sustained? Yeah.
Any other questions?
I wrote a whole list.
Oh, my.
It was excellent, your presentation.
Will this work with women? And why were no subjects selected to be women? That was one question. Did you have a control group? How long did the 16 sessions actually last? Is that 1 a week, 1 a month? What is the time frame? And I noticed in your slides that something dramatic happened between session 4 and 5. There was a giant spike in stress level. So I was wondering what happened there. I was just curious. Applying it in the future, perhaps to police, firefighters, and teachers, who I know also struggle with PTSD quite a bit.
Yeah, okay, so I will, I'm gonna start with the last question first, and then my short-term memory is terrible, so I'm gonna forget all these. No, that's okay, I'll get them. Let's see, we're gonna do a test now. So in terms of the, let's start with the women question, because that obviously is a big one. The biggest, really, there are two reasons that we chose men. One is that it's a more significant problem with male veterans not receiving treatment than female veterans. Female veterans do go. They don't go at the same rate that the average woman non-military member would go, but they do go. This is roughly 2/3 of them will ultimately seek treatment. For men, it's like less than 20%. And so it was more just a scale. That there's just so many more men that are not getting that treatment. So eventually, we would never turn a woman down. There's nothing about this that prohibits gender. But for the purposes of our study, finding male veterans to do anything is actually quite easy. There was no control group. Given that it was a pilot, the first thing we had to demonstrate was that it doesn't work, because we didn't know. And so now that we know, that would be the next thing. And then what we actually want to do is start to pit it against other alternative therapies to see how well it does, and then even maybe some traditional therapies. The spike between the sessions 4 and 5 was that's when we start to ramp up the intensity in the race car session. So it is a more stressful one. And so that's why we saw that big spike there. Let me think. Don't tell me. I don't know, but go ahead. Tell me, give me a hint. How long did it last? Okay, so the 16 sessions, it does vary a little bit depending on the that's in the process. Some guys were able to come in 2-3 times a week, some like once a week. Once a week's bad because it took 16 weeks, and that's a long time. If we can get them in twice a week, it takes 8 weeks. That's still kind of a long time. And each session, the time does vary. Short sessions would be on an hour. Long sessions are like 3 hours. So it can be, it does vary. It's a lot of time. And that's my biggest concern and criticism. Now, there are others, right? We have our quote unquote lab is one simulator, and that's it. So we just don't have the capacity right now to be able to service a lot of people. So we've looked at space at the university, thanks to Mr. Malarkey, our vice president of all the things he's vice president. There's is one. Yes, he is a veteran. He has kind of taken an interest in this, and has assured us that once we are ready, once we have the hardware, that he will find space for us. And those are his words, and I'm holding him to that. Matt was there; he heard it. So we're gonna hold him to that. So that's the hope, is that we can expand so that we can start to see more. We have the students now. We have the ability from a human capital standpoint to be able to service more. But we don't have the hardware right now.
And for these firefighters.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's the most important one. So in terms of expansion, and we actually on Saturday this week in the afternoon, I'm meeting with the chief of police at Sunrise in North Miami Beach about doing some pilot projects with them. We actually have a student in the research program, an undergraduate student, that's doing some work in stress with EMTs. And so we do see some connection there. Very similar profile. EMTs and military guys, if I showed you kind of their personality characteristics, look almost identical. And a lot of that, Sulem, when she mentioned that kind of, you have to go from 0 to 100, that's a big issue for the EMTs. And as much as they say they like it, when you look at their physiological response to it, it's bad. Like the amount of stress that adrenaline isn't necessarily a good thing. And the amount of adrenaline that you have to produce to be literally sitting in a firehouse and then getting the call, hey, we have a massive accident, you need to be there like now. And then you get there and you have no idea what to expect. I mean, it's extreme. And so we're finding, especially with young EMTs, huge issues. So that first responder issue, we have a really good, as you may know, Sheriff Gregory is a veteran, is an alum, graduated from our PhD. I actually have him as a student. So I have him on text, and I'm just waiting to drop the text like, hey, I want to get into, the prisons. I want your correctional officers. I want your sheriffs. Like I want to get access to those folks. So once we have a little bit more validation that we can do this in some smaller police departments, that would be the next step. And then the educator piece, where we've thought about doing something a little different for educators. So we're not quite there yet, but that's another area where it's the stress more than kind of that stress anxiety, especially now. Schools are just an incredibly stressful environment to work in. Yeah, it is. It is. Something needs to be done there. So yeah, I mean, we will not run out of unfortunately, we won't run out of populations to target and innovative ideas to come up with. So great. Thank you. Thank you. Sure.
So this is from Giselle on Zoom. How would a veteran sign up for these programs?
That's great. Well, they would contact Matt. So they would contact our military affairs office. And again, that's in addition to any of the psychological services, the physical health services as well. Matt and his team do an excellent job of connecting veterans to all those resources here on campus that, frankly, not enough people know about, and we need to do a better job, I think, as a university, because we can do a tremendous amount of good for those individuals.
One more. This is from Sandra, and she shares that as a veteran spouse, thank you for everything that you're doing. We wish we were in Florida to have my husband taking these therapies. Is there any plans of moving this maybe to South Carolina?
So, it's funny, the Veterans Trust, they see that as, so we actually went to Fort Bragg last year, and we're able to sit down, it's the largest military training facility, Army training facility in the country. And there's 60,000 people. Fort Bragg's like a city. And they were interested actually in doing something post-discharge. The way that it works now is basically, the way that it was described to me, and I think Matt echoed this as well in his experience. It's like, here's like a PowerPoint and, thank you for your service, and kind of go have a nice day. And then you're off and you're, that's it. Like that's the discharge. And so there has been some talk of the military starting to integrate in some type of a discharge counseling, and they were interested in this idea. And so what we would then do is, create like a space on military bases where we do some of that. And we have talked about, at least in Florida, starting to look at other universities that we could partner with to start to set up other facilities. If you were to ask the Veterans Trust, if Fred Roger were here, he'd say all 50 states are going to have facilities eventually. That's their goal. And when they came to us, just, full disclosure, that's what they wanted. They said, we know this works. We need validation that it works, because they had funders like, Budweiser and other, actually NASCAR themselves, that said, we'll give you money to expand this, but we have to know that it works. And so that was why, in credit to them and their wisdom for knowing that it needs to be validated. Now, of course, us, the geeks on the university side are just interested in all the data that we generate. So we care less about the expansion. I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but that is the goal, is to ultimately expand. So.
Well, I just want to be mindful for our Zoomers, so if I could just take this and say thank you to them.
Absolutely.
Thank you to those on Zoom. If you're welcome to stay, you are, but I just wanted to make sure that we do thank you for your participation, and we thank Dr. Mills. We thank our future doctor, and we are just really happy that you all were able to attend with us online.